They showed up with bulldozers at dawn. 5 massive batteries were installed on my family farm without permission. The HOA woman in her yellow dress stood pointing her finger in my face, telling me it was all perfectly legal, while I crossed my arms and held my ground. When I warned her about building on land she didn't understand, she laughed. 3 days later, $25 million worth of batteries vanished into my soil in seconds. How far would you go when strangers start building on your property? My name is Caleb Ramsey. I'm 42 years old, and the 80 acres you're looking at has been in my family since 1947. My grandfather, Samuel Ramsey, bought this land after returning from the Pacific with shrapnel in his leg and determination in his heart. The eastern section, where this story takes place, was always his favorite. Tricky land, he called it. Needs a special touch. He spent years mapping the underground water channel and installing an intricate drainage system, a system that would later become crucial in ways no one could have imagined. 5 years ago, Ridgeview Estates development broke ground just north of my property line. Their billboards promised luxury country living without the country work. $3 million homes sprouted where the Mitchell family had raised cattle for a century. With those houses came the Ridgeview Valley Homeowners Association, 500 pages of rules governing everything from mailbox colors to lawn watering schedules. I still remember when their president, Arthur Caldwell, showed up at my door in his golf cart. "Mr. Ramsey," he said with practiced cordiality, "we'd like to offer you the opportunity to join our association. There are significant benefits to standardizing our community aesthetic." I declined politely, thinking that would be the end of our interaction. I was wrong. Last Tuesday started like any other spring morning. I was up before sunrise, checking irrigation systems before the day's heat. As dawn broke, I noticed unusual lights in my eastern field, the section my grandfather had been most proud of transforming. When I drove closer, what I saw stopped me cold: construction vehicles, workers in hard hats, and 5 massive white cylindrical structures being positioned on land that had been in my family for generations. I slammed my truck into park and stormed toward the activity, certain there had been a catastrophic mistake. Nobody builds on another man's property without permission. Not in Montana. Not anywhere. What the hell is happening on my land? I demanded, approaching the nearest worker. He barely glanced up. "You need to talk to management," he said, pointing toward the center of the construction site. There she stood, a woman around 30 wearing a form-fitting yellow dress, completely impractical for a construction site. She had a safety vest thrown over it as an afterthought and designer heels that sank into my soil with each step. Behind her loomed 4 massive white cylindrical batteries, already partially installed, with construction equipment moving around them. The morning sun backlit the entire scene, making the batteries gleam unnaturally against my farm's natural landscape. I marched directly toward her, planting myself firmly about 10 feet away. She noticed me and immediately assumed a confrontational posture, pointing her finger directly at me. "This is a restricted construction zone," she declared loudly, her finger stabbing the air between us. "You need to leave immediately." I crossed my arms firmly across my chest, planting my feet shoulder-width apart. In my worn jeans, work boots, and faded denim jacket, I stood in stark contrast to her polished appearance. "I'm Caleb Ramsey," I stated firmly. "I own this land, all 80 acres of it. Have for 15 years. My father owned it before me, and his father before him. The only person leaving is you, along with those batteries and all your equipment." Her eyes narrowed as she continued pointing at me. "Eleanor Vance, Executive Director of Sustainable Development for Ridgeview Valley HOA. These are Tesla Megapack batteries, state-of-the-art energy storage units. Our project has full legal approval, and I have the paperwork to prove it." Between us stood a newly installed sign reading, "HOA Private Batteries," a blatant claim of ownership on my family soil. Eleanor's professional expression hardened. She pulled a document from her clipboard and waved it in my direction without handing it over. "We have all the necessary permissions. The county approved our easement application last month under the Rural Infrastructure Modernization Act. Everything is perfectly legal." I could see the county letterhead, official stamps, and technical language even from where I stood. "This is impossible," I said, my voice low and controlled despite my rage. I never received any notice about an easement application. Notice was published in the legal section of the county register, she replied dismissively, still pointing at me with her other hand. Section 12B of the Regional Planning Code allows for critical infrastructure development with appropriate public notice. The construction dust swirled around us as a loader moved another pallet of materials. The tableau perfectly matched what would later appear in news coverage, her in her yellow dress pointing accusingly, me standing firm with arms crossed, the massive batteries looming behind her, and workers continuing their installation as if my presence meant nothing. Those tiny legal notices nobody reads, that's how you steal someone's land. Eleanor's lips formed a tight smile. The law doesn't require your understanding, Mr. Ramsey, only your compliance. She glanced at her designer watch. Now, these batteries will be installed according to schedule, with or without your approval. As she turned to walk away, I stepped forward. My grandfather didn't fight at Iwo Jima so some HOA could steal his land with paperwork tricks. Eleanor stopped and turned back. For the first time, I saw something other than rehearsed pleasantness, a flash of genuine irritation. Mr. Ramsey, this project represents a $25 million investment in renewable energy. It has federal grants, state backing, and county approval. Your sentimental attachments, while understandable, are irrelevant to progress. Two security guards I hadn't noticed before suddenly materialized nearby, hands resting casually near their belts. Now she continued, you'll be compensated for the easement use, approximately $5,000, which is generous given current agricultural land values. The batteries require only 2 acres of your property. It's not about the money, I said, my voice hardening. This land isn't for sale. Not 2 acres, not 2 square feet. Eleanor's professional mask cracked completely, revealing the corporate predator beneath. This isn't a negotiation. The easement has been approved. Construction continues today. If you interfere, there will be legal consequences. On cue, one of the security guards stepped forward. Sir, we need to ask you to step back from the construction zone. Construction zone? This is my eastern field. I was planning to plant sunflowers here next week. Not anymore, Eleanor said with finality. Progress waits for no one, Mr. Ramsey. I suggest you accept reality and cash the compensation check when it arrives. I watched seething as they continued unloading the massive batteries. One was already being positioned on a concrete pad that had apparently been poured days earlier without my knowledge. As I walked back to my truck, I noticed something that made my blood boil even more. From this angle, it was clear that the batteries had been deliberately positioned to block the mountain view from my house, the vista my grandfather had specifically built our home to showcase. This wasn't just about batteries, it was about breaking me. The county administration building looked exactly as it had for the past 30 years, with paneling from the 1970s, flickering fluorescent lights, and the perpetual smell of stale coffee. I'd been waiting 2 hours when Gary Wilson, the county land manager and my father's old fishing buddy, finally emerged from his office. Caleb, he said with genuine regret in his voice, I was hoping you wouldn't come in. Did you know about this, Gary? About the HOA building on my land? Gary rubbed his balding head. Let's talk privately. In his cluttered office, Gary pulled a thick binder labeled Regional Development Plan 2023 to 2030 from his shelf. He flipped to a section marked with a yellow tab. It's this new green energy initiative, he explained. The state received $400 million in federal funding that required rapid infrastructure development. Our commissioners were strongly encouraged to streamline approval processes. Streamline their building on private property without even talking to the owners? Gary pointed to a highlighted paragraph. This amendment changed notification requirements. Published notice in the county paper now constitutes legal notification for critical infrastructure projects. That's insane. Nobody reads those legal notices. I know, Caleb. He lowered his voice. Between us, this isn't just about energy. Ridgeview Estates wants to expand. Your property sits between their current development and where they want to build next. So this is a land grab disguised as green energy. Gary didn't answer directly. The commissioners were promised significant tax revenue from the next phase of development, and he hesitated, and Arthur Caldwell's brother-in-law sits on the State Energy Commission that approved the grants. My hands clenched into fists. This stinks, Gary. I know, but fighting it won't be easy. These easements have political protection all the way to the state capitol. As I left the county building, my phone rang. It was Diane Evans, my family's attorney for 20 years. Caleb, I heard about the easement situation, she said without preamble. I've been reviewing the filings. Can they do this? Legally, they found a loophole in the Rural Infrastructure Modernization Act. We can contest it on procedural grounds, but I need to warn you, these energy partnerships have deep pockets and political connections. This could take years and cost more than the land is worth. That land is priceless to me. I know, she replied softly. There's something else you should know. I did some research on Ridgeview Estates' development pattern. This isn't their first rodeo. Last year, they placed solar panels on the Johnson property under a similar easement. 6 months later, the Johnsons sold their entire farm at below market value because the solar panels made farming difficult. Partly, but there were also mysterious equipment failures, water access issues, noise complaints from HOA residents. A pattern, Caleb. First the easement, then pressure until the owner gives up and sells. A cold realization washed over me. They're trying to push me out completely. I believe so. Be careful, Caleb. These people don't play fair. When I returned home that afternoon, the installation had progressed at an alarming rate. 3 massive batteries now stood like alien monoliths in my field. Workers had erected security fencing around the perimeter, with restricted area signs facing my house. From my kitchen window, I could no longer see the mountain ridgeline that had been my family's view for 3 generations. The batteries had been positioned with surgical precision to block it, a psychological tactic designed to break my connection to the land. The next morning, I found an official envelope taped to my front door. Crisp HOA letterhead with embossed gold trim. Inside was a formal letter, generously offering $5,000 for easement compensation, along with an invitation to join Ridgeview Valley HOA as a community partner. The letter concluded with a thinly veiled warning about legal consequences for interference with critical infrastructure. I was contemplating my options when Frank Thompson's truck kicked up dust on my driveway. Frank had been farming adjacent land for 40 years and had watched my grandfather transform our eastern field from marshland to productive soil. Heard about the HOA situation, he said grimly as he climbed out. Came to see for myself. It's worse than you think, I told him, showing him the letter. Frank adjusted his worn cap. They did the same to the Hansons last year with those solar arrays. Started with a small easement, then claimed they needed a security buffer zone. Eventually, the Hansons couldn't access their own barn without HOA permission. Sold out for 60 cents on the dollar. Why didn't anybody fight back? Hanson tried. Ended up with legal bills bigger than his mortgage. Now there's luxury condos where his cattle used to graze. Frank looked me in the eye. This isn't just about batteries, Caleb. They want your whole property for phase 3 of their development. I've seen the marketing materials. Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a black Cadillac Escalade with tinted windows. Eleanor stepped out, this time in a business suit, flanked by 2 security guards and a silver-haired man carrying a leather briefcase. Mr. Ramsey, she called out with that same practiced smile, I hope you've had time to reconsider your position. Actually, I have, I replied. I've decided your batteries don't belong on my land at all. The silver-haired man stepped forward. Arthur Caldwell, president of Ridgeview Valley Properties and HOA. Mr. Ramsey, we'd prefer to resolve this situation amicably. There's nothing amicable about stealing land. Caldwell smiled condescendingly. No theft has occurred. Everything has proceeded according to county regulations. Regulations you helped write, Frank interjected. Eleanor's eyes narrowed at Frank. Mr. Thompson, this doesn't concern you. When you're stealing farmland, it concerns all of us, Frank shot back. Caldwell opened his briefcase and extracted a document. We're prepared to increase our compensation offer to $10,000, plus enrollment in our community partnership program, which would grant you access to our club facilities. Not interested. Mr. Ramsey, Eleanor said, her patience visibly thinning. Perhaps you don't understand the situation. This project has federal backing and state protection. The batteries remain. The only question is whether you benefit from cooperation or suffer from obstruction. I served 8 years in the Army Corps of Engineers, I said quietly. I understand situations just fine. Something in my tone must have registered. Caldwell studied me more carefully than before. Your military service is commendable, Caldwell interjected smoothly, but irrelevant here. Our security team will now be stationed on the easement property 24/7 until the project is completed and operational. As if on cue, another SUV arrived carrying 4 more security personnel. That's private property, I objected. Not the easement portion, Eleanor said with a smirk. That's legally under our management now. Before leaving, Caldwell handed me a glossy invitation. The activation ceremony is in 3 days. The governor is sending representatives, along with federal energy officials and national press. It would make a powerful statement of community unity if you attended. After they left, Frank looked worried. What are you going to do, Caleb? I studied the invitation, noting the list of VIPs planning to attend. I'm going to give them all exactly what they deserve. That night, I pulled out my grandfather's detailed topographical maps that revealed what the fancy Denver engineers had missed, the complex network of underground water channels beneath those $25 million batteries. As I traced the intricate drainage system he'd ingeniously installed in the 1950s, a plan began forming. The original homesteaders had abandoned this section when their buildings kept vanishing into the marshy soil during spring thaws. Grandfather made the land stable, but what he could stabilize, I could destabilize. I made a call to Kyle Bennett, who'd served with me in Afghanistan, where I'd specialized in infrastructure and terrain modification. Now a structural engineer for the Army Corps, Kyle listened carefully as I described the situation. Those Tesla megapacks weigh about 80 tons each when fully loaded, he confirmed. Standard installation requires engineered foundations going down at least 12 feet in stable soil conditions. And in unstable soil, they'd need specialized pilings, possibly down to bedrock, depending on the composition. Expensive stuff. He paused. Caleb, what are you thinking? Just weighing my options. Be careful, brother. I know that tone from Kandahar. It usually preceded something spectacular. Over the next 2 days, I maintained a facade of defeat. When Eleanor brought a film crew to document the Community Energy Initiative, I stayed on my porch, watching silently. When county inspectors came for the final approval, I offered them coffee and asked polite questions about the technical specifications. But at night, I worked in my barn, converting old irrigation equipment into a specialized hydraulic control system. Using my grandfather's maps, I identified the key junction points in the drainage network. With some modifications, I could redirect the underground water flow precisely where I needed it most. The eureka moment came when I reviewed satellite imagery of the installation process. The HOA's contractors had poured standard concrete pads directly on the surface soil, no deep pilings, no reinforced foundation structures, nothing that accounted for the unique hydrology beneath my eastern field. They had built on land they didn't understand, guided by engineers who had never worked Montana soil. The night before the activation ceremony, I used thermal imaging equipment from my Army days to observe the battery installation. What I discovered made me almost pity them. The massive units were already running hot during testing, with cooling systems working overtime, a catastrophic design flaw. More importantly, the security team patrolled only the perimeter, avoiding the actual batteries, confirmation of the electrical hazards I had suspected. Even better, I spotted Eleanor having a heated argument with the project engineer, who was frantically pointing at soil samples. As I made final preparations to my grandfather's drainage system, I remembered something he often said. Nature always reclaims what's hers. Sometimes she just needs a little help with the timing. And tomorrow, timing would be everything. The morning of the activation ceremony arrived with perfect Montana spring weather, clear blue skies and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers. By 9 a.m., a parade of luxury vehicles began filling the temporary parking area the HOA had created alongside my eastern field. The gathering was impressive, HOA board members in business attire, county commissioners looking nervous, state officials, energy company executives, and even a congressman from the Eastern District. They'd erected a stage with a podium directly in front of the batteries, complete with a giant red ribbon for the ceremonial cutting. Eleanor spotted me watching from my property line and approached, triumph evident in